For this project, we need fabric, pins, scissors, measuring tape, thread, zipper, and hook and eyes. The zipper has to be close-ended and I used an invisible zipper. The waistband, the pleat length, and the length of the skirt can be all up to you. So here's a longer pleat length versus what I'm going to do, which is a little shorter. I placed tape for my draping so I knew where my waistband and pleat length would be, but you can also just do this by eye, or if you don't have a mannequin, you can do this on yourself as well. And now I'm starting with the waistband, and here I have a little excess at the back, so I'm going to create 2 darts. Now I'm going to try it on just to make sure it all fits and mark down with a pencil where I need to sew. If you don't have a mannequin, you can do this entire part on yourself, making sure to include the 2 back darts. Now using your measuring tape, you're going to make sure that everything lines up okay, and you're going to add seam allowance to your new draft pattern. So I've got my 2 back darts on my back piece, as well as the added seam allowance on the side. And then my front piece just has the added seam allowance on the side. So pinning it one more time, and we're going to create the length and the height of this band. Because we're not creating an actual pattern and it's all a bit rough, we're going to fold it over in half and just make sure that everything lines up equally. And here's our front and back piece. We're now going to cut 2 pieces out, so we're going to have 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces. Now I'm going to cut a strip that's going to make up the pleats for the skirt. You can add to the width of this piece later if you'd like. The reason for adding extra would be if you'd like more or deeper pleats. As for the length, this will be the length of your skirt. Here I'm creating little notches that'll make it easier when I'm sewing the darts. So now we have 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces, and I'm going to place the 2 together and make sure that our front and back pieces line up so that we can sew them together nicely. And we're going to sew our darts as well during this stage. So now we have our back pieces with our dart and our front piece attached. With our 2 pairs side by side with right sides together, we're going to sew the opposite side on our second pair. So as I'm showing, it's going to be the other side, and this way the 2 pieces will line up nicely. It's important that we're only sewing one side of each pair and leaving one side open. We're now ready to attach our 2 pairs, so when we place them together, our 2 darts are going to be facing each other, and with right sides together, we're going to sew along the top of the 2 pieces. We're going to iron that stitch that we just created open at the top of the skirt, and we're going to sew a stitch right beside the seam line, making sure you're catching the fabric at the back. As you can see, we're only sewing 1 millimeter or 2 off from that seam line, and this is what it'll look like when you're all done. You can now iron the top of your skirt flat. And now with the top band done, and you still have that side bit open for the zipper, we're ready to do the pleats. For this tutorial, we're doing box pleats, so here's some examples of the different depths you can put to your pleats. This is a preference and totally up to you, and actually really fun to play around with. The deeper pleats require more fabric, but that's where I was saying that you can add another strip of fabric if you'd like to create deeper pleats. So here I'm measuring out the depth of the pleat and then the space between the pleat and the next pleat. As you can see, my pleats are quite shallow. I'm going to continue this technique for the whole piece until I can wrap it around my waistband. You may need more length, and this is where you would sew another strip of fabric to your pleat piece. I've now flipped my pleat piece right side out, and the next step is the length of the pleats. And so this is also a preference. You can make them as long or as short as you like. And here you can tuck in your seam allowance to get a better gauge of the end look of the skirt. If you did deeper pleats, it would give the skirt a lot more volume. Using those pins as markers, I pinned the darts down to that line. You can now try it on, and if you're happy, you can sew down all your darts. I did this process with a measuring tape just to make sure that they were all the same length. You can now iron all your darts flat. You're now going to take your waistband and fold up your seam allowance on one side and iron it down. You're now going to attach your waistband to your pleated piece. Place the non-ironed side of your waistband right sides together onto your pleated piece and pin this down. And then you're just going to sew straight along where you pinned. and then iron that seam flat. We're now going to be creating our side seam where we'll be attaching the zipper. Again, because we're not using a pattern, it's likely that there'll be some fabric that you're going to have to trim away from the pleated piece. You can fold your skirt in half to make sure that the two sides are equal, and you can trim away any excess you need to. And then with a large stitch, because this stitch will just be temporary, we're going to sew along where we just pinned. It's important for this part that our waistband lines up properly. Now, placing the right side of the zipper down onto the seam allowance on the inside of the skirt, we're going to pin it along the seam allowance. Using our zipper foot, we're going to sew as close to the zipper as we can along where we just pinned, on both sides. Once the zipper is attached, we can use our seam ripper to pull apart that side seam. Once we've opened up that seam, we'll be able to sew the zipper again with the zipper foot, being able to get a closer stitch to the zipper. We're now going to take our other side of the waistband and fold it over the zipper, doing right sides together, making sure that this seam allowance that you ironed is still ironed up. And you're going to pin that for both sides. This is what it should look like when you flip it right side out. Now we're going to sew along right where we just pinned, attaching the zipper in between the two layers of the waistband. You can now flip your waistband right side out. And you're going to place pins in the seam line attaching the other side of the waistband. If you're happy with the length of the skirt, you can also hem your skirt at this point as well. To hem the skirt, I just folded over the fabric twice. Now sew in the seam line where you just pinned, in between the waistband and your pleated piece. Here I'm showing how the seam caught the inside of the waistband. You can sew your hemline now as well. The final step is to hand sew on your hook and eye. And you're all done.